the point in the podcast where Chris spits out his coffee.
3 seconds in.
Yeah, no good. Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow, and welcome back to another episode of Iowa's most annoying conservative podcast. We have a steady repeating beeping sound in the background today from some piece of equipment here in the ITR podcast studio. So if you can hear that in the background, we have no idea what that is or how to fix it, but we're gonna soldier on, right?
The people need us, Chris.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, it's been a busy week, gentlemen, and I think we've got a lot to talk about today. We're just going to kind of rip through a bunch.
Why is John laughing already?
The people need us.
No, okay.
It is really the only barometer I have to tell whether we're going to have a good episode or not is if John's laughing out of the gate, and both of you are going right from the start today. So it's fantastic. So, okay. So we're laughing. We've got beeping in the background, and we're going to try and deliver some fun for you today. First off, because we've talked about it over a couple of previous podcast episodes, we had local ballot special elections this last week for bond referendum or other fiscal matters. I think first and foremost, I want to start with what happened in Urbandale, which had a measure on the ballot for a $43 million bond referendum for a new recreation complex. $43 million is a lot of money. And, it was interesting to watch the debate over that leading up to that election. We Foundation wrote on that. We tried to provide information to voters in the district just on what that was going to cost to try and kind of crystallize that. And voters, well, go ahead.
Was it, what the foundation tried to do was explain, hey, we hear from people over and over, they're frustrated with property taxes. They're too much. They're too expensive. And in that sense, you're almost fortunate that they bring a bond issue to you because then the voter can have a direct say. And so again, the foundation took no stance on whether they should vote yes or no. But if you don't like your property taxes and you have a measure on the ballot that would increase your property taxes for kind of the average home in Urbandale, about $400 a year, that's something that people need to see the line and the connection. Like, vote for the new Uplex, you're voting to increase your own property taxes by about $400 a year.
That's right. And I was encouraged by it. I mean, look, okay, first of all, the result was overwhelmingly Urbandale residents voted no on this project. And a lot of times when you attach a tax increase with a specific project, people are more inclined to support it. But this was, now, a bond referendum like that needs 60% yes to pass under Iowa law. This got 83% no. So clearly, and it was very large turnout. So the final result was 17% yes, 83% no on very, very large turnout for a
special anyway.
For a March election. We don't have all the final numbers yet, but I know that Polk County Auditor Jamie Fitzgerald put out a tweet that said, at least in the Polk County part of Urbandale, that the turnout was, I think, between 26 and 27%, which is really high for a city election. I think that's, in fact, I'm almost positive that's substantially higher than the last city council election.
It's about double what Urbandale's last city or non-November election was, however you want to think about it.
And I think, look, it's easy to go a little too far with the takeaways on what that means sometimes. But when voters had clear information about a project, what it meant, and what it meant to them. And now, and to the city's credit, they were very transparent about this is how much your property tax bill will increase if this passes. Full credit to them. The folks just didn't want it. It was too much money, and they're tapped out. They don't want to pay more in property taxes.
One takeaway from that, Chris, from a broader sense, might be the taxpayer could probably benefit from some more direct and clear disclosure and understanding how all the movements of government would actually affect their own property tax bill.
Yes. And so one of the things, too, that we've talked about ITR local and the information that we try and provide, and we want, our goal is to try and do that more across the state, to provide more information and activate local citizens, because I think we were effective in providing that information, but that project failed because the residents took notice, and the residents and the folks got together and worked on it and shared that information out to one another and came together and made a decision as a community. And that's what we have talked about a lot with the property tax debate, is that this happens at the local level, and local folks need to be aware of these things, get involved, get out and vote. It wasn't the only thing that failed, though, among these bond elections. At Bettendorf, I believe, had one. Mm-hmm. I didn't follow that as well because I don't live in Bettendorf, but they also had a ballot measure that failed as well, and I'm not as up to speed on that.
Yeah, it was a school bond, and those often are received a little more warmly by folks. But again, I don't know anything about it. I don't know what the general sort of mood is there in Bettendorf, so don't know.
And Urbandale has made some comments that they'll have to go back to the drawing board and think about what they want to do with this piece of property, and maybe something else in that land, and that's how it ought to work, right? If the voters engage and say we don't want that, go back to the drawing board, figure out what they do want. And
yes, but let's draw a distinction between going back to the drawing board and figuring out what the citizens want, and just coming back the very next opportunity you can with another big giant project, and you just keep going until you can slip one past. It's almost like there should be a cooling off period before these bond referendums.
Absolutely. And I still strongly believe that bond referendums should only happen in November on the general election date, when folks are accustomed to going out and voting. And it might be one thing if there is something that's a little more timely and a little more critical,
I find it hard to believe that there's anything that's going to cost tens of millions of dollars that you wouldn't have a little bit of foresight about, though. These things don't just pop up overnight and go, we have to get to the voters next week.
They would if they could. Good. Well, I got to mention this other one. John, you're just sitting there waiting. I know you're fired up about this today, but I want to get you in. You sent me a article this morning about the city of Ottumwa and their levy notice, and there's a city council member down there that really wanted to blame the state legislature for his city's budget decisions. And that, is it really fair to make it the legislature's problem that your local property taxes are high?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No.
Well, we've seen this other places, but this was fairly brazen from this statement. But if cities control their own spending and their own budgets and their own levy rates, and this ham-fisted effort to try and blame the legislature because they made a correction and established the correct calculation of the rollback rate is somehow the reason that you're raising taxes, it just doesn't add up for me.
No, and this is nothing new, because I think for quite a while there's a blame game going on with local government people across Iowa, whether it's the city, county, school districts. They know that people are concerned about property taxes, and that's one theme, I think, from this past Tuesday's elections, because if you look at Urbandale, I believe there was a infrastructure measure voted down in Swisher.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
There's a theme where you look at the opposition to this, and it's maybe not necessarily to the project, but it's people are saying we don't want higher property tax bills. And so cities are running up against the problem of needing to do something about property tax, which brings us back to the Ottumwa councilor's comments. Blaming the state is just something that they do. And I've heard countless city officials, county supervisors, and school districts either blame one another for the reason of high property tax bills. And so, for example, I've heard county supervisors say, well, don't blame us for your high property tax bill, it's your school district. or the city councilor might say the same thing, or don't blame us, it's the county.
Or it's the assessor.
Yeah, or it's the assessor, and a large portion, they always blame the state.
Yeah.
We have your property tax bill is high because of the state legislature. And I think that's an unjustified criticism.
Your property tax bills are what they are because it's a direct reflection of what your local government is trying to spend. So where this city councilman in Ottumwa kind of got off the rails is he's only focusing on the levy rate. And I guess everything else equal, yes, let's knock that levy rate down. But it's not about levy rate. It's not about the assessment. Those things are just inputs to the final product, which is what you are choosing to spend, and that's what citizens should never take their eye off of.
That's right.
Don't get as concerned about the assessment. Don't get as concerned about the rate. What is the sum total of the product of those two things? What are you trying to spend?
And Ottumwa, to be fair, a little bit is we talk a lot about the levy rate doesn't matter. It's actually what you pay. In terms of, your assessment went up, and so you're paying more because of riding the assessment wave. In Ottumwa, their valuations actually declined a little bit, and so you may actually have a higher levy rate and still pay the same. And I don't know how those numbers work out in Ottumwa,
right.
but this is really telling here, and it also shows that I don't think that this councilman really even understands what it is that the legislature did. But he says this has nothing to do with any action the city has taken. It has everything to do with the state of Iowa looking to recoup funds without working with cities and counties in the state. Well, recoup funds, the action that the legislature took did not increase the state general fund bottom line one dime.
Whether they fixed the calculation or not had zero impact on what the state was going to take in.
Right. And so this was just them getting it right. Now, moving on, saying cities and counties are forced to pay for it. No, they just get a correct calculation of the assessment. This councilman goes on, they could have said to the cities and counties they made a mistake and split the difference. They could have allowed us more time to bring them that money. Okay, first of all, they did give you more time, which was asked for and granted by the legislature.
Another 6 weeks or something?
Yeah. I mean, and most cities have already done this. I don't know why this is
Guys,
kind of
Chris,
coming up.
But it's really basic algebra, right? The state changes the valuation calculation so you can change your levy rate accordingly to get to that same amount that you're budgeting to spend.
Yeah, it's the same amount for its taxpayers. It's a very city budget number focused mindset. They got greedy and wanted it back now.
This was never
Greedy.
the state's to begin with. It's not the state recouping anything.
Come on. The ones that should be greedy are the local property taxpayers that are tired of paying it and want a little bit of help. So, okay, good. Okay, moving on. I mentioned, John, you're ready to move off of local budgets and taxes. So let's get to the fun stuff. The caucuses, the Iowa caucuses, at least on the Republican side, are upon us. We've got... I know this week we've had Nikki Haley in town is doing a couple of events, and we're recording on a Friday. And this afternoon, I think Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is making his first trip to Iowa. Not a declared candidate yet, but we all know where this is heading. Doing an event with Governor Reynolds and Nikki Haley with Senator Ernst. It sure feels like things are in full swing now, right?
It does, yeah. And former President Trump will be in Iowa on Monday, I believe.
Yeah. So it's coming, and I love it. I don't know if you guys love it as much as I do, but having all these folks come in and courting Iowans is
it is exciting.
Yeah. So I saw, and I probably have I had it up, but the Register released their first Iowa poll, sort of trying to gauge where Iowa voters are with regard to the Republican caucuses. And they didn't release a ballot test of who would you vote for, and I suspect that's probably coming. But Republicans and I were asked the names of various candidates and a favorable or unfavorable rating of each of them. And I thought it was interesting that President Trump had a rating that was fairly similar to Governor DeSantis's, and actually Mike Pence and Nikki Haley were tested as well. Nikki Haley had a higher never heard of or not sure rating, but it really feels like the race in Iowa is fairly open. Would you agree with that, John?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think. Most speculation is that right now it's going to be a two-person race between DeSantis if he gets in and former President Trump, and I think that's going to be a strong possibility.
It wasn't actually a huge sample size for actual Republicans within that poll. But as you look at the comparisons between Trump and DeSantis, their net favorables are actually pretty similar. The difference is 20% of folks are not sure about how they feel about DeSantis, whereas the Trump voters, only 1% aren't sure, right?
Yeah.
So they already you either like him or you don't like him, I guess. So it'll be interesting how those undecideds start to view DeSantis, I guess, or the ones who aren't sure of him yet, what verdict they reach on him.
I when I look at this, and maybe this is some of my background with polling, look at the very favorable and the very unfavorable, because that shows the intensity on this. And despite everything that's been said of President Trump, his very unfavorable is still only at 8% among Iowa Republican voters. I think we've had this conversation too. Whatever you think of President Trump, the policies still remain very popular, and his ability to get a lot of good things done.
Yep. So
that still resonates with Iowa Republicans, I believe. The very favorable was 44% for Trump and 42% for DeSantis, and then much lower numbers for Pence and Haley. I tend to agree with you, John, that right now it feels like that there's two sort of main candidates here, but having been through this several times, somebody else is going to get traction, and maybe it's a race for third, because there's, that old idea of three tickets out of Iowa. Who is the third ticket? And that is wide open. And these things can switch quickly. I think it was 2012 where you had two or three different front runners just in the last 6 weeks, where it was just cycling through, and one statement, one ad, one miscue can really flip a lot of things pretty quick. So, that'll be interesting to see. So I think the question that's really on folks' minds when it comes to polling, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, boy. Yep.
Do you think maybe we can get an ITR Foundation poll sometime in the near future?
I think we should do it.
All right, let's go.
I think we should do it.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Now, we may not test the caucuses quite the same way, but we want to do a lot of issue polling this next time. There's a lot of stuff out there being discussed, and a lot of folks like to claim that something the legislature is doing is unpopular or popular, but it really is very, very often there's very little hard data behind those assertions. Right. So let's see if we can't put a little hard data behind whether these things are actually popular or not. And I'm excited about it. So
yep,
folks should be too. John, you actually in our potpourri here of all the stuff that we're throwing out, you had a guest spot on another podcast recently, and so you've been apparently getting so popular here at the ITR Live podcast that you're going national on us.
That's right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
What did you do?
Neither you nor I got the invite.
No, they don't care about us. It's John. It's John's show. I'm just the facilitator. So. So what did you do recently on that?
Well, the Michigan's Mackinac Center invited me to be on their podcast. It's called The Overton Window.
Okay.
And
that's way more clever than ITR Live.
And the reason they invited me is that they, just as many other people have reached out to us in different states, have seen some of the good policies coming out of Iowa, whether it's been this year the Students First Act, the school choice bill, or the last year's income tax reform bill that created the flat tax. So, they wanted to know that story about how I was doing these things. So I was able to share not only some specifics on what we did on education and tax reform, but also kind of why did those things happen. And I was able to talk about the good things that Governor Reynolds has done, and even Majority Leader Whitver in leading those efforts of. And one theme I stressed in there is that, because they kept asking, well, how is Iowa doing this? And I said it comes down to, leadership. And I always come back to what I've heard Senator Whitver repeatedly say over and over again, is that we're not going to waste our majority. We're coming here to do bold things, and that's exactly what they've done. And both the governor and the legislature have delivered on their promises, and that's why I think we've seen Iowa become not just more conservative as a red state, but also, Iowans overwhelmingly sent Republicans back in a landslide in the last election.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast yet, John, but I read their write-up, which they do a way better job on that than I do with the write-up of these episodes.
Such a good job, in fact, that's the interview is now up, both the podcast and the article on ITR Foundation.
Yes.
So
good plug. But there's a phrase that I think you used in there of red state federalism, John, and I want to not necessarily talk about that today, but leave that there because I want to explore that in a future episode of this, of Republican governors, Republican legislatures, and some might term that as a competition among one another to see what they get done, or it is at least them aggressively pursuing conservative reforms in states as part of this idea of federalism and states leading the way and showing that it can work. So I think we should circle back around on that because I like that, and I think that's a very important thing that we need to showcase here. And among those that are engaged in that effort, I'll put Iowa at the top of the list.
Yes. Yeah.
So very good. Gentlemen, I don't know how much more of the beeping that I personally can take. Mm-hmm. So I think we're gonna wrap it up.
Good. I think well done.
Okay, good. Well, thanks for joining us today. There's a lot of good things happening in the state of Iowa at the local level, at the state level. Reforms are happening. Change is coming about and making this place simply a better place to live, a better place to own a home, hopefully, when we continue to make work on progress, a better place to raise a family, start a business, all those great things. And we're excited to be a part of it. And I'm glad that we have a chance to showcase that as our family of organizations and on this podcast. So don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends and your family and your neighbors and anyone else that cares about these issues. And with that, we will see you next time.